Hey y'all, this is Isisra, and I have found a new and interesting way to use AI not for image generation, but for learning about painting and learning about structures. So I have this painting here that was work in progress, just like a face from my imagination. And like all faces from imagination, or all anything from imagination, there are some things that are going well about it and some things that are going less well about it. And one of the challenges that a lot of artists can have is that trying to identify what each of those things are is difficult. So it's one of the reasons that a lot of people will do this thing where they flip their canvas so that your autopilot brain is like jarred for a moment and like, oh my gosh, I see that things are different, and being able to identify where some of the errors are in order to make changes. So I found that AI is a tool that could be really helpful in this process of getting me out of thinking in the autopilot way from having looked at something for too long. So I ended up taking the face and then putting it into Stable Diffusion and doing XY plot that had some low denoising levels that are relatively similar to the original piece, going all the way up to high denoising levels, which are entirely different and more based on the prompts that I was using to craft them. So, uh, having these things, some of the stuff it's like, oh my, even though this has some really face-like things in it, there's a lot of things going on in the one that's closer to what I did that does not look properly like a face. So I was able to look through and be like, oh, one thing that I realize is a little bit funky is there, in looking at all of these, there's this chin shadow which is very soft. Here it's soft, here it's soft, here it's soft. All of them generate like a very soft edge there. And I realized that in my version, I had a very hard chin edge, and that was not helping with the type of generating a shape that works that I wanted to do. Um, Another thing that I was able to identify after looking at that was the cheek shadow. The way that I had constructed the cheek shadow, it was making it so this plane looks very flat in between uh, the areas of the mouth and then the cheek. And I needed to be like, oh my gosh, there's all these shape changes in here that could be really helpful. Uh, Moving on from that, the next thing was, of course, I had just like covered up the ear with hair, but seeing iterations with ears versus iterations that don't have ears, it made it very apparent how the feeling of missing an ear was pretty substantial. And even just like that little hint adds so much. And on top of that, the area I've put near this ear has these very harsh shadows, which are not how ears generally work unless somebody's under a spotlight. So I was able to use that to identify, hey, the this ear shadow is something that needs to happen. We need to have an ear and an ear shadow. Along with that, I was like, I struggle with noses in general, but what's going on differently here? Oh gosh, if I look at mine, there's no like highlight that's going along the edge and everything is so dark, and that's probably why when the AI was like, let's make something that's similar to your image, it made these really weird muddy effects that are splashed around it. And because it was just trying to figure out what are you doing with all of these shadows in an area where it looks like the rest of the face is pretty lit. So what what's going on here, friend? And then along with that, so that was the nasal bridge. Um, Along with that, I noted that the corner of the eye, mine's doing this weird thing where it slumps really far down and is not really angled in a way that is aligned with the face. It looks like the eye is going at an angle like that while this other one is going like that. So faces generally have not that symmetrical, but leaning much more towards symmetrical than this. And being able to identify that shift in angle was something that was really helpful. And then finally, looking at the brow shadow, that huge thing that we identified between like, oh my gosh, in the ones where it's being low denoising levels at 0.35, it very much is capturing that hyper intense shadow that I have here, which is not how lighting like this generally works. And then as soon as denoising is like, let's make this more like a face, all of the pieces of faces highlighted here are substantially more lit in those locations where shadows are reserved for areas like around these eyelids and things like that instead. So, by looking through all of those things and being like, my gosh, there are these areas of error, and I was able to use that AI as like a in a lot of artists use critique from friends or someone redlining in order to help them figure out this stuff because all these things are present in various pieces, but when you've looked at them enough and with whatever your level of knowledge is, it's easy for them to become invisible. But then by using the AI as a support tool to figure out what's different in between what you're doing and what you want to do, and also to note, because I was not super specific with prompting, my initial figure looks like a mixed person, maybe a thicker Islander person, but then as the I did not be super specific with the AI, so a lot of the features ended up much more Caucasian in how things transitioned as it went less and less similar to my initial image. So learning about which things I want to keep and being like, oh, the nasal bridge needs to be adjusted in order to work right, but I need to do that in a way that's not going to just make it feel like this is a person that's losing their ethnicity and just becoming more white. So I looked through all of these things and I ended up adjusting them. So I took that hard chin and I softened it. And then I took the cheek shadow and I made it so it curves over a bit more to be more similar there. Same with making it so this ear shadow, or making an ear and then making a softer shadow beneath it so it's not quite that hard edge that it was before. And then with the nasal bridge, making it much more defined with light while trying to maintain the broadness and slight spatulation of the nose. Then pulling up that corner of the eye to make it feel more in alignment with the other eye. And adjusting the brow shadow so that it doesn't feel like there's this enormous darkness that is coming out of nowhere. And thanks to the support of learning with the AI there, I was able to go in between this and this. And it was still just all painting, but it was painting with the opportunity to use AI as a way to learn and refine without having the AI be what generates your images. So I hope that this could be helpful to some other artists in exploring how to paint in their path and what are ways that some of these new tools could be used outside of the ones that people have been traditionally using. I hope that y'all have a blessed and beautiful day and an amazing new year.